Are you curious about natural wines and how they're different from clean or raw wines? Why do natural wines provoke such furious debates within the wine world? And which one should you try? And why will you want to read our guest's memoir tonight? It's hot off the press. Yes, the pun is intended. You'll get all of those answers and more tips when we dive into our chat. But first, I want to hear from you. If you're watching this video on the replay, please in the comments type replay and let me know where you're logging in from, what's in your glass, what's the weather like where you are. And of course, if you're here with me live, I want to know that too. You've just joined the most passionate group of wine lovers who gather every Wednesday at 7 p.m. Eastern to talk to the most interesting people in the world of wine, like our next guest. I'm Natalie McLean, and I offer online food and wine pairing classes at nataliemclean.com. All right, so now just before I introduce our guest, I want to let you know that Rachel Signer has agreed that one of you will win a gift subscription to her gorgeous magazine, which we're going to talk about. Pipette. It's just beautiful work of art. So she has generously agreed to give a 1-year subscription to one lucky winner. All right. So back to our guest. Rachel Signer is a wine writer originally from Virginia, now living in South Australia. That's quite a journey. She's written for numerous publications, including The Guardian, Vogue and Eater, among others. She is the publisher and founder of Pipette, as I mentioned, an independent magazine about natural wine, which is sold in more than 20 countries right now. She makes natural wines with her husband in the Adelaide Hills under the labels of Lucy M. and Persephone Wines. And her fabulous memoir, You Had Me at Pet-Nat, which I had the pleasure of reading an advance copy of, it's just wonderful, has just been published by Hachette Books, and she joins us now from her home in Australia. Hello, Rachel.
Hey, Natalie. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, so glad you're here. And we're connecting. I mean, this is your morning, this is my night, but I'm so glad you could make the time. And I'm just so interested in what you're doing because, as I said, I had a taste of your writing through your memoir, and it's just so wonderful. We're going to talk more about that as we get on into the conversation. But first, let's start with some of the travel stories that you've had throughout your career. Let's talk about the time you were in the Loire Valley. Tell me a bit more about that.
Yeah, I love talking about that trip. And originally, it was part of my book, and then it didn't make it in. I think when you're writing a book, there's lots of pre-writing, and then you eventually find the story that you actually need to tell.
Mm-hmm.
So that was, I think, 2015, and I had been enjoying press trips to Europe, but I was filled with this feeling of like frustration because every time I went to Europe, I desperately wanted to visit natural winemakers. However, as you probably know, press trips generally do not feature natural winemakers for various reasons. The main one is that they're not. What's that?
Is it usually because they don't have the budget or they're not part of these big wine councils?
They're not part of the appellations generally.
Ah,
So they make
right.
in France they make like Vin de France, or in Italy it's like outside of the DOC.
Right.
And we can get into why that is.
So they're
I
not
talk
playing
about
by
it a
the rules,
little.
the laws.
They don't play by the rules. They're rejected by the tasting panels, and so they're these like outsiders basically. And I did occasionally get a few natural winemakers on the itineraries, and so I was getting these tastes of what I wanted. But finally, I realized I was just going to have to do it on my own. So I was in Europe for a press trip, and then I just tacked on a week, invited a friend with me. I spent a long time making contact with winemakers in the Loire Valley, and I did the region in like 7 days.
Wow.
And it is enormous. And it was a very good learning experience. And it just, I think afterward, I had this like insatiable desire to keep doing that and to tell those stories. And it was the impetus for starting my magazine as well, because I was having a really difficult time placing these stories.
And why
Again,
was that? Why
because
was it mainstream
Yeah,
magazines
I
buying
just
them.
think that natural winemakers then, less so now, but I think they were seen as like not to be taken seriously,
Hmm. And why do you think that is,
ultimately.
or was?
Um, I think maybe distribution wasn't quite as good at that time. I think the boom in natural wines was like just about to happen.
Hmm.
But I think also there was just a bit of snobbery looking down toward natural wine from the establishment, which includes like seasoned editors at wine magazines. I do think it has changed. I think maybe younger people have come into editorial positions, and there's just natural wine like everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's a different landscape. But back then, I was not getting traction on my pitch about winemakers in the Loire Valley being the first in Europe to use Georgian Quevri to make wine.
Ah, those big
And I thought that
flavorsaurs.
was, yeah,
Yeah.
buried underground, imported from Georgia. Fascinating, like incredible. But I wasn't getting any traction. So
And one of the most famous natural winemakers is there, isn't Nicolas Jolie, or if I'm
that's
pronouncing
right.
it
And I
right?
did
Okay.
visit him
You
on that
did?
trip.
Okay.
Yeah.
Ah, what
So
was that like?
well, I briefly mention it in my book, only if to set a contrast to the family that I work harvest with later, who is in the same region, but very, very different.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, Nicolas JolieJulie comes from a fairly aristocratic lineage, and I mean, he was revolutionary. He did so much to really put biodynamic viticulture, I think, on the map. And he still does that with his association. He has this global association, and they have tastings, and they used to travel and have like conferences.
Mhm.
And all of his books, I think, and they've been translated into many different languages. They've touched a lot of people. And yeah, I mean, it's a small-ish property, which is its own appellation because it's so historic.
Hmm.
And he makes like 3 wines.
Oh, wow. Wow. That sounds
So
like
very,
Sassicaia being its own appellation. It's
it
just,
is.
wow. And
Exactly.
you tried the wines. What were they like? Like, how would you describe them?
I think that they're very like powerful, and they definitely require aging, but something, my palate has changed so much in recent years. I
Oh,
would
yeah?
not probably be able to drink them now because they have fairly, to me, a high level of sulfur additions.
Huh. Okay.
And I've basically stopped enjoying wine with more than like a very small dash of added sulfur,
Of sulfur.
which I'm happy to talk more about it. It's not like a judgment. It's
Hmm.
just my personal taste has really shifted in that direction.
Well, let's talk about that now since you've mentioned it. So, just like in uh, non-technical terms, why do many winemakers add sulfur in the first place? What are they trying to achieve there?
Yeah, yeah, it's definitely worth going over because I don't think it's very understood. And I really learned a lot when I wrote an explainer about sulfur for the fourth issue of Pipette. So there's different times when sulfur can be added, or sulfites, as some winemakers prefer to say. And you can add it to the grapes, you can add it to the fresh juice, you can add it after malolactic fermentation, or you can add it at bottling. We might say that probably the least invasive, the lightest touch would be to add it at bottling, because then you've basically let the wine go through its whole fermentation journey to the
Hmm.
point where you're adding sulfites to kind of make sure it doesn't re-ferment in bottle and to
Okay.
protect it. Sulfites are an antibacterial, antimicrobial agent. So they're going to kill bacteria that's like alive. And they're going
Okay.
to basically ensure that your wine kind of stops where it is and doesn't continue. And obviously, from a commercial perspective, that's extremely desirable. However, I think winemakers who don't add sulfites, and that includes me and also my husband, and winemakers I admire, I think that we take that risk because it's this exciting anticipation of what the wine will become. And the wine does keep transforming. And I think most of the time it has like really exciting, incredible results. And I think wine without added sulfites does get a bad reputation because there can be faults that occur. However, I think that for us, drinking a wine that is really truly alive, the excitement of that outweighs the potential risks or the possibility that there will be some possible flaws.
And when
And
you say
so,
alive,
yeah.
you by alive you mean it's you said still evolving. Is it because there's still live bacteria in it, or what do you mean by the wine is alive?
Yeah, it continues developing and maturing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's generally believed that all wine continues aging and maturing, right? That's something
Sure.
people love about wine, but it's very different in a no sulfur added wine. It stays light and it stays fresh, but it develops complexity. And I guess that would be because of, yeah, the presence of bacteria that are allowed to thrive. So yeah, I mean, I don't understand it from an enological standpoint because I didn't attend winemaking school and I have no actual training, but it's alive to me the same way you like drink kombucha, and it's very clearly alive. And it's just more like nourishing is a word that I find myself using, and I don't mean to sort of say that it's healthier, but it feels more nourishing to me.
And so, I mean, most of us, or in the mainstream, think of sulfur as giving it shelf stabilization. You mentioned that in a commercial sense, that stability or that consistency is important. But when you're talking about wines with great diversity or flavor, you know, you're not going for consistency, then of course it doesn't play an important point. But do you have any idea of how long a no sulfur added wine can age? I mean, generally, are they shelf stable, or are they like, you know, are they sort of 50-50? It could go off, it could be beautiful.
Yeah, I've had several experiences with 10-year-old no sulfur added wines. So I can even, they were very specific and very surprising. So I remember exactly which wine. So one was Persephone, which is a Pinot d'Anis from the Loire Valley by the late Christian Chaussard, Domaine de l'Abruzzo. And I had it at a natural wine bar in the Paris suburbs, and it was just stunning. It was incredible. The other was Dinabolo from the northern Italy region, the Piacenza Hills. So that was a skin contact white wine. And I expect that skin contact white wine making does help with the longevity and the protection. It seems that the skins add a kind of protection when there's no sulfur added. And the other was a South Australian wine, Jauma. And I'm not sure that was actually 10 years old, but close, definitely close. And notably, those ones are under crown cap. So they're in clear bottles under crown cap and no sulfites added. So by all definitions, it should not be a wine that ages. But it absolutely, and they emerge like pristine and so fresh. I do think storage is probably more important if there's no sulfites to protect the wines. They really need to be away from sunlight and in cool temperature.
Yeah. And just one last clarification, but correct me on this. Sulfites exist in nature. So even though a winemaker might not add any or very low sulfur, the wine is still going to have sulfur because it's there, it's natural in its state. So there's no sulfur-free wines, right?
Not exactly. So sulfites appear, for example, in volcanic soil. So probably most wines from volcanic regions would have higher levels of naturally occurring sulfites. And then they also seem to emerge in the fermentation process. So at the same time, when we analyze our wines, just at the Institute in Adelaide, which we have to do for export, they come up as no detectable sulfites. so lower
Okay.
than 4 milligrams per liter,
Okay.
that's as low as it can get.
Hmm.
So yeah, I wish more people understood that, because often you hear people saying, well, there's sulfites anyway, so who cares if they're added? And I think the argument gets a bit convoluted and the point gets lost when we kind of go in that direction, or people talk about how dried fruit has so many sulfites added, to which I reply, maybe find some that doesn't have any added. But um, the point is not that they are quote unquote bad for you, or that winemakers who put them in their wine are trying to poison you or anything like that. I really don't want to make those points. I just think wine is very, very exciting when no sulfites have been added. That's all.
That's great.
So it's a positive
Okay.
versus a negative. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's very helpful. So let's talk about one more trip that you took. Let's see. You told me about the Loire. Um, then you had a trip to Spain. You visited Spain and you were impressed with the lifestyle there, the joie de vivre. Tell us about that.
So I was 20, and I actually started out as a Spanish language major,
Okay.
and and then I later switched to cultural anthropology, but I lived in Spain for 6 months in the coastal town of Valencia, and I lived with a family, a Valenciana family, and it was just the most life-changing experience for me. I hadn't spent, I think that was definitely my first time in Europe. We didn't go abroad much as a family. So I'm living with this family, and just the decadence and the way like enjoying things was celebrated and built into life and part of the family structure really struck me. And so every Sunday, my host mother, Susie, would wake up really late because she would go out partying the night before, and Spanish people party from like 1 a.m. till 6 a.m. And then she'd get up super late, have a cigarette, and start making paella. And her relatives would come over, and they would all start drinking rum and coke and smoking. And around 3 p.m., we'd all sit down to this massive paella, and then they'd all unzip their pants, sit down on the couch, and sit there having coffee. And like, it was a lot, definitely a lot for like a young American girl to take in. But I mean, things were a bit more gentler. We're like seeing retirees in a mountain town having black olives and red wine for breakfast. I mean, that's
Wow.
mind blowing. But I think I was like, this is it. This is what the whole point of life is.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
I mean, the quality of things in Spain is so good. Even like table wine, they like, I was amazed that you could go into a grocery store and get wine for €3. And the appreciation is so sincere, and coming from an American culture where like work is highly valued. I mean, obviously we don't even get paid vacation in the States. So you're kind of conditioned to believe that work is the highest form of being. And that was just unraveled for me, and I've never gone back. And yeah, I mean, I think that has led me to this life of making wine. We do it because we love eating and drinking, and we love making things and enjoying them with people.
That is lovely. Very holistic. Wonderful. We all need to go to Valencia. That sounds like a beautiful coastal town. Um, wow. All right, let's jump to one more story that'll take us closer or back to natural wines. You you had a bit of a debate or dust up online with a wine writer, British wine writer. Tell us about that. What happened? 2017, I guess. A while back.
Sure. That was when I still had a blog, which I only used kind of sporadically. So I'm not meant to name him. Okay. So it's a writer who I at the time wasn't aware of, but he has authored several books, and it came to my attention, and it was something about why all the Psalms have become hipsters and why it's the death of wine. So obviously the somms who have become hipsters and with their beards and their tattoos, they are all pouring natural wine, and so it's the death of wine. Very sensationalist. But I just couldn't help, and I still can't help but respond when people write things like that, because I think it really like does it does a huge disservice to very serious, hardworking winemakers who make natural wine and the professionals who have devoted themselves to these wines. And professionals who pour natural wine often do not have sommelier trainings, certificates. And I would hope that after some of the things that happened in 2020 regarding the Court of Master Somms, that people would finally start to see that those certificates are not really the be all and end all of a wine career, and that there's there's absolute dignity to being a professional without having ever done a course, and you can learn in other ways. And I think that to call a sommelier a hipster just because they don't wear a suit and they didn't spend $10,000 to learn all the different appellations of Jerez is really missing all the time and work that people do put in. And in natural wine, it's a little bit more of a culture, like a whispering culture. So you learn by talking to people, you learn by visiting winemakers or finding out when they're in town and going to see them. Like they often used to come through New York and they'd pour their wine at the 10 Bells, and like you just go. And that is real work, to take the time to know people's stories and talk with them. So I just have to push back against any kind of discourse like that, because I just think it's wrong. Yeah.
Yeah, and you yourself kind of learned on the fly. I'm a big believer in that, by the way. I mean, I don't have a master sommelier or a master of wine, but you took a few workshops, but you learned by, reading and tasting and drinking and talking. Were there any things that in your approach to learning about wine that helped you along the way?
Yeah, I totally believe in the autodidact approach. And
Self-taught?
yeah, I think that the best thing is to connect your senses. So have a glass of wine and just look it up and read about it. Or have the Jancis Robinson book handy, and the grapes one. I think that's amazing. Or any book, you've written a wine Bible, have one or two near you and just flip through them and read about the region, read about the grape variety. If the producer is well known enough that there's something about them, which by now there should be. There's Isabelle Legeron's book, which has quite a few profiles in the back. Any kind of encyclopedia like that, if you read about it while you're drinking, you just connect, and then you developed a more innate sense. I do think visiting. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, sorry. We layer things due to emotion. Wine, of course, the smell goes directly to emotion, but if you're reading about it at the same time, I can see how that sort of neural networking would wire up that way if you can combine the two at once. It's almost as good as being in the place where the wine was made and laying down a memory of learning that way.
Exactly, which I was just kind of leading into. I mean, we're just getting to the point where I think people can travel safely. So if you can make your next vacation to a wine region that you love, I mean, it's just life-changing. So it's definitely worth it.
And so for those who aren't professionals but who are avid wine lovers, what is your best advice for visiting a wine region like the Loire, or pick another one, but what's a good strategy for really getting the most out of a visit?
Well, my experience is mostly with natural winemakers, so I'll offer a little bit of advice for people interested in that, because those wineries are not, there's no tasting room, and there might also be no staff at all. They probably do have help, but they're not going to have someone, wearing a name tag greet you. So you'll probably be greeted by the winemaker and their partner, maybe their children. So these you're visiting a family at their home, and their winery is probably next to their home. And so I would just be really conscious of that. So, it's quite personal. So when you contact them, it really helps if you can let them know who you are and why you're visiting, like very specific. So I'm not in the wine trade. I'm just really obsessed with Cabernet Franc. I'm very interested in visiting Saumur, and I love your wines. And I'd like to taste in your cellar. Very specific. Or I would like to see your vineyards because I'm learning how wine is made. The more specific, the better. Because if you're an importer, they know what you want. They know you're probably trying to buy their wine. But if you're just coming to visit to learn, they're like, tell me more. Tell me exactly what you want. And they need to know how much time you might spend because they're fitting you in between managing sales, bottling. Maybe they're trying to prune the vineyards. Winemakers are busy year round, and these are not corporate structures. They're doing everything themselves. And my other suggestions would be if you can bring like a very small gift. I think it's a really nice gesture. It could be a small bouquet of flowers. It could be like a loaf of bread. Something in the like $10-15 range, or something from home. It's a very nice gesture because these people are probably going to open bottles of wine for you. They might also go out to the market in the morning and get some really nice local cheese because they want you to see the best of their region. And so I think being conscious of that is great. And the other thing is, do not expect them to know English. Maybe so definitely learn a little bit of the language, or consider bringing someone who speaks the language with you.
Sure. I don't know if Google Translate is up to that task yet, but yeah, that's a great point.
Yeah.
Language.
It's pretty frustrating for a winemaker who has taken 2 hours of his day and he's standing there with you trying to explain what's in the barrel and you don't understand. So I think it is definitely worth if you can just bring someone that knows the language and everyone's happy.
Those are great points. And I love the gesture of the gift. That's nice. Very nice. So, and then just on natural wines, why do you think they provoke such strong debates in the wine world? I just think some of the most, fiercest debates have been around natural wines. And
yeah, definitely. I think it is very, the debate or it's almost strongest in Europe. And I think that is partly because of the appellation system and the way that natural winemakers don't fit in. So Europe created this appellation system supposedly to protect traditions. And then the irony is that if you don't add yeast to your wine, you're probably going to be rejected by the tasting panel. So
do you mean sulfur or yeast?
Oh, I mean yeast.
Yeast, okay.
I mean the very, very basic first kind of part of making natural wine. Natural wine is made without commercial yeast.
Okay.
So you're starting with just grapes and letting them ferment. And those wines get rejected from tasting panels because, quote unquote, they don't taste typical. And that to me is super ironic because you're making wine the way the grandparents, probably the great grandparents, pre-World War II would have made wine. So why is it rejected? Because standardization has actually taken the place of tradition. And that is the debate raging around these appellations and winemakers who are kicked out or kept out or whatever. And I think for a lot of natural winemakers, it's insulting to be told that because they don't add things to their wines, that they're not going to have the place name on their label. And conversely, I think to people that fit into the appellation, it feels like a threat. And so I think there's a lot of tension around that kind of problem. I think more in the trade, I think it goes back to this idea that somms or professionals who work with natural wines sort of are outside the box, and that we often don't go through the channels. So we didn't go through the Court of Master Somms or some other kind of association. And here we are. And some people don't like the way that they taste, quite honestly. And
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's a problem. I don't think that everyone needs to like natural wine necessarily. I do think there are a lot of very classical tasting natural wines that don't get enough attention. So not all of them are like wild and racy and so on.
Right.
So I think there is a natural wine for everyone, so to speak. But yeah, does that make sense to you? I don't know. What do
It
you
does.
think?
Yeah, well, I'm not aware of the European debates, but I see a lot of what happens in North America, and people just get sometimes almost religious about the natural wines, their purity, and then I mean, it's just sometimes it's the hipster business, and is it a way of keeping people in and out? Like, who are the cool kids? Like, I'm coming at it from a different perspective. Um, but yeah,
So so we call that if you know, you know.
okay.
And I do think and when I was coming up in natural wine, that was the thing. If you know, you know. If you don't know, sorry. And I was like,
So it wasn't like a cliquey club of people who drink that
absolutely.
natural
And
wine.
I'm sure people
Okay.
would say that, I do that now. But I've created a magazine so that you can know. And because I didn't really like that kind of, if you know, you know. But sorry, if you don't know what Radicon is, I'm not going to tell you. I don't think that's great. I mean, people are going to do that with everything. People do that with music. People do that with clothes, with art, whatever.
Yep.
But that's not how I am. I've loved like educating people about natural wine and just like sharing information as much as I can.
It's beautiful. We're going to talk about your magazine in a minute. Now, so is there any official definition or regulation or law or anything about natural wines anywhere?
Actually, France has created a new certification, and it's called
Okay.
Van Méthode Nature. So
Okay.
wine method. So that has to be from certified organic vineyards, and there's a limit on sulfites, and it should have no refining and filtration, and indigenous yeasts. And so obviously they would like analyze it, and someone would come inspect the vineyards, and that's great. But no, there is no definition. It's really like a movement. And it's a culture, and it's very loose. And I think some people feel strongly about it not being defined because they don't want to be told what to do. So it's an iconoclastic thing in the first place, and so it's by nature sort of difficult to impose upon a definition. But there is a generally agreed upon, and sort of what I define it as, and how I run the publication, which is organic vineyards. However, it is sort of widely understood that they might not be certified organic for various reasons. So then no added commercial yeasts, no fining and filtration, and minimal added sulfites, and no anything else. So no reverse osmosis, which is done quite a lot with like mass-produced wine.
And what does that do for
no,
the wine?
oh
Reverse
gosh.
osmosis? Does it remove alcohol? Is that why they do it?
No,
No.
I think it removes oxidation. I do not know, Natalie. I do
Well,
not
you
know
don't
what
do
it does.
So I guess you should know.
Yeah, I think I've never even like seen a reverse osmosis machine. People that went to winemaking schools would be able to tell you definitely what it does. So we'll look it up later. And yeah, like no added tannin. That's a more kind of straightforward thing. No added mega purple. There's lots of additives that go into wines. None of those. And so it basically should be just grapes and potentially a small amount of added sulfites. What's a small amount? The raw wine fair accepts up to 70 parts per million.
Okay.
I think it probably should be more like 20 parts, because after that it starts to taste like a very conventional wine to me. So again, it's all very fluid. It's a spectrum. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think,
So,
is it organic wines in the US, is it 100 parts per million or lower? For
Right. So
organic?
wines that say organic wine in the US, there probably is a sulfites limit. I have sort of lost track of that because I haven't lived there in a couple of years, but it refers to organic vineyards, and it doesn't necessarily refer to the winemaking process, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So there can definitely still be sulfites, but I believe there's a limit. And Demeter certified is another thing. So Demeter is the Biodynamic Association, and you can have your estate certified by them. And they would also have a sulfites limit.
Okay. Well, let's also get back to your story too, because here you are in South Australia, by way of Virginia, by way of New York, a pit stop to Spain in the middle. Like, tell us how you got to South Australia making wine with your husband. I mean, that is a circuitous route, but an interesting one that you detail in your memoir. So,
right.
Yeah.
It's all in there. Well, we met in the Book of Georgia, just to make things even more complicated.
The home
I know
of many natural wines. Yeah.
I've sort of stopped trying to explain my life fully to people because it starts with, well, where are you from? And I'm like, do you mean New York, or do you mean Washington, D.C.? Or are we talking about, which is still kind of my spiritual home in a weird way. I dream of going back there. So I was trying to move to Paris after years of living in New York City. But I met my husband just before I went to Paris. We were in the Republic of Georgia. And that is a chapter in my book. And the Republic of Georgia is a really amazing, and just super culturally rich place. And every moment of that trip was just incredible. The hospitality that we were shown by Georgians is unparalleled. They eat very fresh food, and they have incredible recipes. Beautiful dishes. Such a great place, and the wines are wonderful. And
so you were on this same trip with
exactly
your husband. So how did you got to know each other on the trip? I mean, what did you say? Hey, he's cute, or what was your first impression?
Well, we all joke about the white bus. So there were two buses. And one was white and one was gray, because it was a big group. It was like 20 people. Ooh, that wine looks good.
It's evening here, but I know you're breakfast time. But I have an orange wine from Southbrook in Ontario, and it's got
cool.
lots of stuffings.
I can have a rosé. It's like practically lunchtime.
Breakfast of champions. But this woman, Anne Sperling, she farms biodynamically, and she started the first orange wine appellation in the world. Like, it's based on orange wine, the appellation.
Oh, cool. So Vidal is the variety. Right. Yeah. Oh, it's quite aged. It's just
beautiful. Oh, yeah. There's lots of
so you're having an aged natural wine right now.
I am. I've got two wines.
2016. Oh, great. Yeah, no, I can't wait to hear more about them.
It's got so much particulate. I love it. Anyway, sorry, you were saying you were on the white bus, or
one bus was like very calm and docile, and then the other bus was wild, and it had the Australians, it had the New Yorkers, it had Irene, this amazing Italian woman that makes wine on this tiny island off the coast of Tuscany. So our bus was wild. Alice Faring was also on our bus, and
author.
So and she is not exempt. I mean, we were like, it was like adult summer camp. It was ludicrous. We were drunk. People were like dressing up in each other's clothes. The men were wearing lipstick. We were telling dirty jokes and like weird stories and sad stories. Like, I don't know, it got pretty, it was like, summer camp, adult summer camp. So Anton and I were on the same bus.
That's great. So did you sort of manage to get sitting beside him, or what was your strategy, or did you have one?
Oh, my strategy. He came to me. I don't know what you're talking about. I have no idea. Yeah, I mean, we like, so I did know about his wines. I had had his wines twice, and they had both been kind of incredible experiences. And I was just kind of curious to know more. And so I like struck up a conversation with him in a very journalistic way. I was like, well, there were also kind of rumors flying around about him because people were saying he's not really organic. And I was like, this is my chance to ask him about this. And so I did. I mean, yeah, well, that's the other thing with no certification. Sometimes people aren't sure, are skeptical. There can be a little bit of skepticism. And so you just, when you meet someone in person, that's kind of your chance to really find out, who are you? And yeah, then we had an 8-day conversation. The trip was 8 days.
Organic? Was he organic?
Yeah, and the reason there was skepticism, and the reason we still are not certified organic, we work with like 5 different growers, and certification in Australia is very expensive. So to certify like a many $1,000 operation, and there just hasn't been that kind of margin.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. So an 8-day conversation. Well, that sounds. Now, why does he have the nickname Wildman?
Oh, I think partly because of his hair, which is always a bit just wild. And yeah, like he and Tom Showbrook used to go around and, get drunk and stand on tables and recite poetry. And I don't know, they just started calling him Wildman. Like it just
wild ferment, wild hair.
Nickname.
Yeah. Okay. Got
exactly.
It. So you took this detour to Georgia. Your intention though was to go to Paris and write fiction and be like Hemingway, that sort of thing. And
that's right.
Just on that point, what is your favorite book? And you apparently take it everywhere with you, or you had been.
Yeah, it's right here. A Movable Feast. My brother gave me. Oh, I take it everywhere. Yeah, it's very important to me. My older brother gave it to me when I was 20. So it's Ernest Hemingway's memoir of living in Paris when he was kind of getting his start as a writer. He was sending short stories to magazines back in the States. And it was the 20s, which in France they call it les années folles, sort of the interwar period. And there was a culture of decadence. And there was a lot of internationalism as well in Paris in those years. People from all over the world, Josephine Baker, I guess, is a famous example, were coming there to like be artists. So that was this idea that I had, maybe a bit erroneously, I don't know. I mean, so much has changed in the 100 years since then. But yeah, it was really after this romantic idea of Paris as like a bohemian place to be. But I think I did sort of find that in my way.
With your natural wines, and now you have the memoir. So you circled back. You got there to your own movable feast in another way.